I've always loved dogs. As a kid, I grew up surrounded by them because my parents just adored them. That's probably the reason why I never had any siblings. With me and at least 3 dogs around, there just wasn't a place for anyone else. But I didn't mind. Having 3 dogs usually means there's not much time for boredom. Also, their unconditional love and boundless energy never failed to brighten my day. That joy never left me, which is why after high school I enrolled in college and studied veterinary medicine. Even more, every summer, during my college break, I was working in a local dog shelter. The shelter wasn't a glamorous place, but it was where my heart felt at home. To make things even better, there was one experienced vet called Misha. So when I wasn't working with dogs or people who were coming to see them, I was talking and watching Misha work. The number of things I learned from him was just precious. The asylum was located on the edge of the country, near our local forest. It was a modest, sturdy building with a long stretch of outdoor kennels and a large fenced-in play area. The dogs we took care of were mostly stray, rescue, or surrendered pets. Each had its own story. One story sadder than the other. I just don't understand people who throw out their dogs in the street at a whim. They're such special creatures. There's something special about the way a dog's eyes light up when they see their owner coming home after a long day at work. It's a bond that stands for a whole lifetime. And yet some people treat dogs like garbage. One of the dogs I became particularly attached to was a dog named Pepperoni. We named him Pepperoni because we found him eating leftovers of pepperoni pizza in the trash can near the shelter. Pepperoni was the kind of dog that got along with not just humans, but dogs as well. That was a pretty rare thing here at our shelter, because most of the dogs we take in have had a lot of traumatic experiences, and because of that, they're not so friendly. They're either afraid of humans or other dogs. Some of them are even aggressive when in contact with other dogs, and we have to keep them separated from each other. But Pepperoni was different. He was a creature of joy, always ready to play fetch or just snuggle up next to you. I remember the first time I saw him near that trash can. He ran right over to me with such enthusiasm that he almost knocked me over. It didn't take long for him to win my heart completely. Because of that, I would often stay after work hours just playing with him, teaching him cool new tricks, or simply sitting next to him and petting him. Honestly, I would take him with me the moment I first saw him, but at that moment I just couldn't. After the summer would end, I would have to return to college, which is located 4 towns away, and I couldn't take care of him. Also, the landlord of the apartment I was in did not allow dogs in our building, so I couldn't take him with me even if I could. But my plan was to take him in as soon as I finished college and got my own place. To my disappointment, that plan would never become my reality. One evening, I made plans with my girlfriend, Samantha. She lived 2 streets away from me, and I would often visit her. The 2 of us went out for a short walk. Then we decided we would return to my place and watch some TV. That night, Lord of the Rings was playing on TV, so we decided to watch. It was the 3rd part, Return of the King. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of Lord of the Rings, but my girlfriend Samantha was crazy about it. So, like any good man would do, I agreed to watch it with her. We had cuddled up on the couch with a bowl of popcorn when commercials started. Samantha quickly went to the toilet, and I stayed on the couch. At that moment, the local news came on. A reporter was discussing about a series of gruesome attacks on livestock in the area. Chickens, pigs, cows, even sheep had been found, mutilated. People were confused by the events that were happening. Nobody could explain it. By then, Samantha got back from the toilet and started to listen to the report too. The authorities suspected a pack of wolves might be responsible, as the surrounding region was forested. "Do you really think it could be wolves?" Samantha asked. There was some concern in her voice. "Maybe," I replied, though I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. But this is kinda weird. Wolves usually avoid humans, and anywhere humans frequent, so they don't normally attack livestock so close to town. Well, whatever it is, I hope they find it and deal with it soon, she said. It's creepy knowing something like that is out there, and not too far away. To be honest, I didn't really think about it much after I heard it in the news. I remember back in the day, when I was just a little kid, my parents would talk about similar things happening in the country. I think back to when foxes would kill chickens and really tick off the local people. A week after that, I was working late at the asylum. It was a quiet night, just like most of them usually are. I was finishing cleaning the inside rooms of the shelter with one of my coworkers. Misha suddenly showed up, asking us if we could clean up the floor in the treatment room. My coworker wasn't really into that idea, but I agreed to help. Misha had really taught me a lot, so I didn't mind repaying him here and there. Misha went on his way and my coworker refused to clean the treatment room with me, so I was eventually left alone in the shelter. Misha had left the keys for me to lock up the place when I was done. A little while later, as I was cleaning, I heard the most bone-chilling, loud, and painful screams coming from the dog cages, where we kept them overnight. There was a lot of barking, too. It sounded like something or someone was attacking the dogs. I thought that was impossible. They were locked up safe, right? My heart leapt in my throat, and I rushed out to see what was going on. When I arrived at the cages, everything seemed normal at first. All the dogs I saw were in their cages, though they were very clearly agitated. I was confused. Sure, I was pretty tired by then, but I know I wasn't just hallucinating and hearing things. Naturally, I walked over to Pepperoni's cage to check on him. Pepperoni was standing at the front of his cage, staring at me with an intensity that made me very worried. There was something different about his eyes, something that felt predatory. Probably some kind of wild animal, I thought. Something got in, spooked the dogs, and left. I shrugged off all the screaming I'd heard, taking a quick look around the cages and not finding anything. I locked up the shelter and went home, thinking only about getting some sleep. I took a shower, lay in bed, and I fell asleep. But before I did, I couldn't stop thinking about how there was no way a wild animal could have gotten in that shelter, not through the fence we had. The following day, I came in early to report to Misha and the others the events of the other night. They dismissed my claims, thinking with the same logic I was the night before. Nothing should be able to get through that fence. I tried not to think about it, so I started on my regular jobs. Eventually, I decided to check up on Pepperoni. When I did, he seemed okay, but I was still getting these bad vibes from him. I wasn't sure why. Something about him seemed different. Later on in the day, I noticed more strange things about Pepperoni. His behavior changed drastically. He was aggressive now, when he never was before, often picking fights with the other dogs. The other dogs, in turn, would begin to fear him, running away from Pepperoni whenever he walked by. It was like they knew something. I tried to convince myself that Pepperoni was just having a bad day. Maybe he was sick. I decided to ask Misha to examine him just in case. Unfortunately for me, at the moment, Misha was out for lunch, so I would have to wait. Still, while looking at Pepperoni, I had a growing sense of unease. Pepperoni wasn't the same dog I knew. He wasn't himself anymore. Suddenly, my coworker came in with some people, telling me that they were looking for a golden retriever to adopt. It was a local family that I knew immediately, a man and woman with 2 younger children. They were looking for a friendly, playful companion for the family. Naturally, they were drawn to Pepperoni, as he was a golden retriever. I wasn't really happy about that. Firstly, I'd hoped Pepperoni would be my dog. And secondly, I was very concerned about Pepperoni's weird behavior. I tried stalling them until Misha came and examined Pepperoni, even suggesting other breeds to them, but they were determined to take Pepperoni. Despite my protests, they accepted and adopted him. I even warned them of his recent change in behavior, suggesting he might be sick, but they said they would take him to the vet, one that they knew in a nearby town, as they lived closer to that one. In the end, I let them go, hoping that maybe a loving home would bring back the old Pepperoni I knew. That evening, as I was carrying out the trash to the dumpster behind the shelter, I sensed an awful smell. When I reached the dumpster, amongst the rubbish, I found a dead dog. But it wasn't just any dog. It was a golden retriever. His body had been torn to shreds, as if some wild, deranged animal had gotten a hold of him. His fur was tainted with blood. There were deep scratches along his sides. When I looked closer, I couldn't breathe. It was Pepperoni. Those blue eyes, the occasional dark spots in his fur. It could only be Pepperoni. This is impossible. No, it's just a similar dog, I said to myself. During my trip back home, I began to think, what if that dog really was Pepperoni? What if the creature I gave to that family was something else entirely? At that moment, it seemed really insane to me, because I didn't really believe in the supernatural. What kind of animal can come in, kill, and replace a dog? That night, as I was sleeping, I was awakened by the distant sound of sirens, of ambulances and police. It's not a very common sound around here, and I'm a light sleeper. I assumed some kind of fire had broken out in someone's home, and quickly went back to sleep. Come morning, I learned the horrifying news. The family who had adopted Pepperoni had been killed. Their bodies were mutilated, apparently in some sort of wild animal attack. To make things worse, police found a lot of scratches in their house. I froze in fear and shock, realizing that my intuition may have been right. The thing I'd given to that family, that thing that looked like Pepperoni, it wasn't Pepperoni at all. It was something that had come in, killed him, and took his place, even mimicking his very appearance. I tried to ask the police if they'd found a golden retriever at the deceased family's home, but they said they did not, assuming that he had escaped during the chaotic and tragic events. For a long while after that, there were no further reports of dead animals or people. Working in that shelter never felt the same after that. I was constantly on the edge of my seat. To this day, I cannot explain what that creature was or how it looked like Pepperoni, but I am certain of two things. It was evil, and it wanted human blood.
I work as a security guard for a branch of a big-name investment bank in Manhattan. My job's pretty routine, since I work the night shift when the bank is closed, and I've never had to deal with burglaries or people trying to get in at night. In fact, I'm not entirely sure why the bank needs a security guard at night, as the place is secured so well already. I worked the day shift for about 6 months. I was only recently transferred to work nights when the last guy, we'll call him Mike, suddenly stopped showing up for work. I'm lucky to have procured the job as I have so many fewer responsibilities now, and yet I get paid the same amount. I work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my job mainly consists of monitoring the 6 CCTV security monitors, and occasionally walking through each floor, checking to make sure all doors are locked and nothing's out of the ordinary. Due to the simplicity of my job, I I work alone, so initially it did feel a little eerie being in such a big building all by myself. But any sense of fear or tension was quickly replaced with boredom, as I soon realized I had nothing to do. Most of my time was spent in the security control room, sitting in front of the monitors, kicking my feet up on the desk, reading a Stephen King paperback. One night, while strolling through the first floor, I heard a long, drawn-out "sss." It seemed to be coming from the floor below me. I'd never heard that sound here before, so I was perplexed and a little bit creeped out. I ran to the stairs and down one level to the basement. I got my keys out, found the right one, and unlocked the green metallic door with a big white B in the middle. I stepped through the door and was immediately sprayed with a thin layer of water. Instinctively, I jumped back, pulling out my X-26 taser gun to point at whatever was in front of me, as I sputtered water from my lips and wiped it out of my eyes, just to see that it was a burst pipe. I sighed with relief. Moments ago, I was convinced I was about to apprehend an intruder, but I holstered my taser instead. The burst pipe was approximately 30 inches to the left of the door, while the main valve was about 60 yards to the right of the door. So I jogged down the hallway in that direction to shut off the water supply in hopes of stopping the leak. I'm not sure what could have caused the pipe to burst. Perhaps it was just old and rusty and needed replacing, which wouldn't be a surprise considering the state of this place. The basement, compared to the rest of that building, could be a good setting for the next Saw movie. The lights always flickered, the paint on the walls was chipping, and I swear I heard sounds of creatures skittering in and out of small cracks in the floor. That's what drives me to do whatever I can to stay the heck out of this place whenever I can. This is one of the few times I've actually had to come down here for any reason. There are some custodial and supply closets, and other maintenance rooms down here that I was briefed about, but nothing that would require my presence. There's even one room with a big metal door that has a large radioactive warning sign on it that I was told specifically not to go into. Apparently, the room has high levels of radon gas, which results from the radioactive decay of uranium. No one really talks about that room, and unnecessary questions are discouraged by the supervisors. Wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible, I pulled the lever of the main valve, turning off the water supply. I then headed back to the basement door to go up and log what happened. As I walked back, I was able to take in my surroundings in better detail. I walked another 3 feet and stopped dead in my tracks. The door with a radioactive sign on it, the one to the room I was told not to enter because it's full of radon, was cracked open. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. The feeling I felt could only be compared to what people who looked into the eyes of Medusa might feel a millisecond before turning to stone. I knew that being within feet of that room with its door cracked was a life-altering event. I would have immediately rushed back to the security office, calling my manager to report what I'd seen, if it weren't for the sound of distant conversations emanating from beyond the door. I was confused. I strained my ears to try and make out those sounds, praying I wasn't going crazy and hearing things. And there it was, a faint but present cacophony of voices, with an occasional loud yell or bang. I was baffled, as it sounded like this room was a lot bigger than I expected it to be, and because the voices sounded so far off. Instinct told me not to get any closer, but curiosity got the better of me. I slowly walked over to the door to peer through the gap inside. What I saw wasn't a hollowed-out dank basement room with miscellaneous objects strewn about and pipes running around the walls and ceiling. No. What I saw was a long, steep staircase descending further past what my vision could make out. It was lit up by long, thin, dim, fluorescent lights spread out horizontally on the ceiling. The quality of the walls beyond the door were in stark contrast to those making up the rest of the basement. They were covered in shimmering silver tiles. It gave off a futuristic aura. Still hearing the voices off in the distance, and having seen the staircase, thoughts of radon exposure evaporated from my mind as the inquiring and skeptical part of me took over. I wanted to find out what was going on here. I pried open the door a little, stepping through to the staircase. The voices from down below were a little louder now, and I began to hear what sounded like machines beeping and phones ringing. The confusion I felt temporarily overshadowed my fear of the situation I just walked into. Yet, as I was about to take a step down the flight of stairs, I immediately was hit with the realization of what I was about to do. This room clearly was not meant to be stumbled upon by a mere security guard, and the lengths the company went to keep people out of the basement, specifically this room, made it clear that I should not be there. I thought about Mike, who seemed to drop off the face of the earth when he stopped showing up to work, and I had never heard from him again. I recall him mentioning hearing strange noises from the basement during the night shift the week before I last saw him. What if what he saw downstairs scared him so much he got up and left, never to come back? Or what if he never left at all? At least, not of his own free will. I decided then and there the best thing I could do was turn around, go back up to my security station, erase any footage of me entering the room, and act like nothing happened. That is exactly what I did. Whatever was going on down there was never meant to be discovered by me, and no matter what fascinating discovery I would come across by going down those stairs, I valued my life more than satisfying my curiosity. I quit the job a week later. I told my employer I got another job, closer to where my parents live, since I needed to be around them due to health complications. Leaving was probably the best choice I could have made. I did not want any association with that bank ever again. I try not to think about what I would have seen if I went down there, but to this day, it still gnaws at me. I hope that whoever and whatever was down there never catches up with me.
For a stint of time, I worked as a park ranger at Chippewa National Forest in northern Minnesota. I won't give my real name, and I won't tell you when exactly. But I will say I've seen some crap that still gives me the creeps. There's one incident that stands out above all the rest. The kind of thing that makes you question everything you thought you knew about human nature, and the crazy things going on in certain people's minds. It happened one October. We had an unusually warm fall that year, and the autumn colors were absolutely stunning. Tourists were flocking to the forest in droves to see the foliage. As much as I loved the beauty of the place, it definitely meant more work for us rangers. More trash, more lost hikers, more disrespectful drunk folks. I was working late into the night, doing my usual rounds in my truck to make sure all the campsites were quiet, and no one was causing trouble. I think it was around 2 a.m. I was at a pretty remote access road, which winds through one of the densest parts of the forest. There's no cell service out there, and you're a good 30-minute drive from any kind of civilization. I rounded a bend, and that's when my headlights caught something in the road, maybe 100 yards ahead. My mind immediately jumped to deer. Obviously, we get a ton of them. They're always darting out in front of vehicles, too. Can get pretty messy. As I drew closer, though, I realized it was a person standing stock still in the middle of the road. Very weird. Don't get me wrong. Coming across hikers at night is not unheard of. We get the occasional group that underestimates a trail and ends up stumbling back much after dark. But this far out, at 2 a.m., no gear, no flashlight. It was extremely weird. I slowed to a stop about 20 feet away. Then I turned on my spotlight. The figure didn't move or react at all. I was certain it was a man, probably in his 50s or 60s, with long graying hair and a scruffy beard. He was wearing dirty, tattered clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in months. and he was just standing there, staring straight ahead with this vacant expression. I rolled down my window and poked my head out. I called to him, introducing myself first, then said, "Are you okay? Do you need assistance?" No response, not even a blink. Alarm bells were going off in my head, but I knew I had to check on him. I got out of my vehicle, one hand on my bear spray, the best non-lethal defense we were allowed to carry. "Sir, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" As I got closer, the hairs in the back of my neck stood up. Something was very, very off about this guy. His skin had a grayish pallor, and his eyes looked very wrong. They were too intense, too focused, and he was completely motionless. I couldn't even see his chest moving with breath. I was about 5 feet away when he finally moved. His head snapped right towards me, so fast I swear I heard his neck crack. Then he smiled. I have never seen a smile like that before or since. It wasn't wide or manic like you'd hear in other stories. Instead, it was small and knowing, and absolutely terrifying. It was like the look of some sort of carnivore who knows it has cornered its prey. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and raspy, like sandpaper on stone. "I've been waiting." I stumbled backward, fumbling for my bear spray. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay where you are." But he stepped forward anyway, still smiling that awful smile. "I've been waiting for you." He started to sing. I was beginning to think this was either a very horrible prank or this man was beyond insane. I managed to grab my bear spray and I aimed it at him. "Stay back. I will use this." He laughed a vile and dry laugh at me that echoed through the surrounding forest. "I've been waiting, always will." Terrified, I sprayed him full force in the face. And I kid you not, no exaggeration, the man didn't even flinch. There was no change in his face or expression or movement before or after. He kept on smiling and walking towards me. I ran then. Training be darned, I ran like heck back to my truck, and I could hear him behind me, his footsteps unnaturally quiet. I dove into the driver's seat and slammed the door behind me. I searched for, then grabbed my keys. As I looked up to put them in the ignition, I glanced to my left. The man's face was pressed right up against the glass on the driver's side window. That freaking smile, somehow more terrifying up close. I finally got the key in the ignition and floored it. The tires squealed as I took off down the road. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the middle of the road, gleefully watching me drive away. He raised one hand in a mocking wave. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, driving far too fast down the twisting forest road. I didn't slow down until I made it back to the main ranger station. I screeched into the parking lot and ran inside, shouting for anyone. They found me nearly hysterical. When I finally caught my breath and calmed down enough, I told them what happened. They thought I was nuts. A couple of the guys went out to check my truck, and that shut them up real quick. On the window was a perfect handprint and face print. And the weird thing about the handprints was the shape. The fingers were abnormally long and thin, the palm too narrow. This convinced them to go look for the man where I claimed to have seen him. But they never found any sign of the man there. The higher-ups tried to pass it off as some homeless guy or a drug addict. I hoped that's all it was. But the way he talked and the way he moved, it was too purposeful, too graceful. This man, at least to me, was something else entirely. I kept working at the park for another year, but I wasn't the same after that. I was jumping at everything. And that was by far the scariest work encounter I've ever had.
This happened when I was 12 years old. We had a family that was friends with my family, and all of us would hang out quite a lot. My family was 2 parents and 5 kids, ages 2 to 12 years old. And their family, we'll call them the Smiths, were 2 parents with 3 boys ages 5 to 9. My parents enjoyed socializing with theirs, and all of us kids would play together. As a 12-year-old, I was interested in a lot of things, including science, nature, the extraterrestrial, and of course the paranormal. The oldest Smith boy was only 9, but we were the same height, and I thought of him as my intellectual equal, so I frequently forgot there was an age difference between us. The first thing I noticed about their house was that it was soundproof. As far as I know, they did not do anything intentionally to soundproof it, but there were multiple occasions where we'd be doing something like barbecuing in the backyard, and I would go inside to use the bathroom, and the house was completely silent despite the noise outdoors. I couldn't even hear the loud 4th of July or Memorial Day party taking place in the backyard. I would become uneasy when I would shut the sliding glass door behind me and enter that silence. Because if I had to yell for help, no one would be able to hear me. Needless to say, I tried not to be alone in their house. One day, we were swinging on the swing set in their backyard, and I was watching my shadow getting longer and shorter as I got closer or farther away from the ground. Except for some reason, my shadow was not following the same long, short, long pattern it would usually follow when I was swinging high, low, high. Like I said, I was into science and knew my shadow should be longer or shorter, depending on the angle of the sun and my height off the ground. I promptly ran experiments and found my shadow looked different in different parts of their backyard. I pointed this out to the oldest Smith boy, and to tease him I said, "I think your house is haunted." I expected to have an interesting conversation about it, but instead he went straight to his mom and told her what I said. It was an odd reaction. Normally, we would play for hours without talking to our parents. I expected his parents to just laugh off the comment, but they were uncharacteristically serious and asked, "Why would you tell him that?" When I remembered he was only 9, I felt bad, and I realized I probably shouldn't be saying things to scare him. But the thing was, I hadn't said it to scare him. To me, it was a real idea that something odd was happening here, and I wanted to discuss that with someone. What scared me, though, was seeing his parents so serious. They were usually the most unserious people I knew. Now, as an adult looking back, the only reason I can come up with to rationalize how his parents reacted is that I know how hard your life gets if your kids aren't sleeping through the night. So maybe they were worried the idea would cause some sleep issues. I guess you could say that's my working hypothesis. Eventually, they forgot about my comment because they asked me not too long afterward to babysit for a couple of hours while they went off to dinner. I didn't really feel old enough to be babysitting. I was only 12. I felt like I was the same age as the oldest Smith boy, so telling him what to do probably wasn't going to go over well. I said yes anyway, and the only instructions they gave me were to tell the boys to head to bed at 9 p.m. I didn't have to bathe them or help them brush their teeth, but just pestered them to lay down in their beds. When the time came, I was surprised they lay in their beds without a fight. So I went downstairs to watch some TV. As I sat in the living room, I began to hear kids laughing. It sounded like when kids giggle from playing a fun game or being tickled. Naturally, I thought it was the 3 boys, so I went upstairs to tell them to cut it out. But when I looked into their rooms, all 3 boys were sleeping. And not fake sleeping either. I'm talking mouth open, arms bent at weird angles asleep. I went back downstairs confused, thinking there must be kids playing kickball or something in the street in front of the house. But the place was noise-proof. Even so, I went to check. I looked out the front door and no one was out there. I even walked to the perimeter of the house from the inside, looking out all the windows for the children I thought I was hearing. But I didn't see anyone at all. When I stuck my head out the sliding glass door and into the backyard, I heard crickets, but no laughter. It was quieter outside the house than it was inside. I decided not to let it show that I was freaked out, so I stayed calm, sat on the couch, and turned up the TV until I could no longer hear the laughter. Eventually, their parents came home, and that was that. They asked if the boys gave me any trouble, and I said no. This happened 16 years ago, and nothing remotely paranormal has happened to me before or since. I can't explain it, but that house felt powerful. Not evil or dark per se, but just a feeling that I could easily be overpowered. I like to think whatever it was supernaturally protected those boys. They're all in college now, and they seem to be doing well. I'm not exactly sure what I believe about the paranormal, but I do know I experienced it there.
Seven or so years ago, I used to work at a brewery/pub. It was this big old warehouse from the early 1900s. Red brick, steel, and wood. A charming place. I worked there for a couple of years, and most of the time, it was pretty tame. Despite the occasional back-breaking labor, some good coworkers and the lively atmosphere made it all worthwhile. But there were some moments which defied rational explanation. Moments I can only describe as paranormal in nature. One such event happened during a particularly late night shift. I was tasked with closing up the warehouse and loading docks. The chores involved making sure there wasn't anything obstructing the truck's parking spots, stacking up any loose crates, turning the lights off, and locking everything down. Basically ensuring the smooth flow of operations for the next day. I was making my rounds, checking off each item on my mental checklist. Suddenly, I felt this eerie situation, the kind of feeling you might get when there's someone looking right over your shoulder. Then a peculiar noise caught my attention. I turned right around, finding a lone beer bottle rolling towards me from the shadows between the tall stacks of crates. It wasn't forceful. It looked as if someone gently placed it on the floor, then pushed it in my direction. It was a curious sight, though. At first I wondered who could have done it, then quickly assumed it must have fallen and I didn't hear it. So I picked up the bottle, placed it inside a half-empty crate, brushed off the incident, and continued on. Eventually, I was making my way to the exit, when seemingly out of nowhere, a myriad of beer bottles began to roll towards me. Each one looked as if it had been slightly nudged from the spaces in between the crates. What in the world? I thought. I was tired, and the guys around here do like to prank on occasion, so I shouted into the dark. "All right, you got me. Come on, I gotta close up." I expected a response of laughter or hushed whispers, but instead, it remained dead silent. I waited for a couple of minutes, then turned on the flashlight on my phone. Despite the creepy feeling building up in that poorly lit warehouse, I began looking around the stacks of crates, assuming I would find some giggling coworker trying to hide. After searching every corner and turn, I gave up. I was pretty freaked out by then. I was left with more questions than answers, and I would have to pick up the bottles before I could leave. I was feeling frustrated and uneasy, so I called out into the dark again, just in case. "All right, guys, I'm locking you in here. See you tomorrow." Just as I finished saying that, a crate full of bottles fell from one of the stacks, landing a mere 2 feet in front of me, glass shards and beer exploding all over. The next day, I told my boss about it, only to be met with a dismissive shrug and a half-hearted explanation that a rat had brushed against the crate, causing it to fall. I don't think it was a rat. I felt more like there was something weird going on in that old brewery. Thing is, those crates, when fully stacked, weighed around 20 pounds, if not more. How would a single rat push it? I talked to my coworkers about it. I was told a number of different stories. Stories about ghostly encounters and apparitions, noises and voices echoing through the empty halls, objects mysteriously moving on their own. A lot of tales and legends circulating among the staff. A lot of folks thought the place was haunted. Another experience happened during a closing shift in the pub section of the brewery. When closing the pub, the last thing you're supposed to do is restock the walk-in freezer. As I descended into the underground cellar to restock the walk-in, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened in the warehouse. After that night, every time I found myself alone at work, I felt a little scared, to be honest. Down in that cellar, the air felt real thick and heavy. All I could hear was my footsteps and the machinery below. The freezer was probably just as old as the building itself, and it sat underground, right underneath the bar. I was down there filling that enormous thing with kegs and boxes. It was a very old freezer, from a time when safety standards and regulations weren't a big concern. The freezer doesn't open from the inside, no handle, nothing. Just a flat, plain steel door. I did what was common practice among the staff when you had to go inside that death trap. I placed a keg securing the door open. I was halfway through the task when I heard the door slam shut. I panicked, rushing towards it, but by then it was already locked. I frantically pounded on the door, hoping someone would hear me. I screamed and yelled too. My panic grew, realizing the last person there with me was my boss, and he would be in his office, 2 floors above me, probably with his door closed. I tried my phone, but I had no service, probably because I was locked underground inside this steel trap. I was wearing only jeans and a t-shirt. Every passing second, that cold gnawed at my bones. Before long, my face went numb, and my hands felt stiff. I tried to make a blanket out of scrap cardboard, but it was doing a very poor job of keeping the cold at bay. Time seemed to move at a snail's pace in there. For a while, I just started to watch my breath. Now, I had a date with a customer of ours, and when she didn't find me upstairs, she went looking for me, and soon located my boss to ask where I was. When he couldn't find me anywhere else, he went to the cellar, only to find me inside the freezer. I'd been in there for about 45 minutes. I remember the glorious sound of the door clicking open, seeing the surprised faces of my boss and my date. At the time, I was sitting in a corner, cardboard stuffed in my shirt and pants, phone in hand. I was in the middle of writing a letter to my parents and considering drinking myself to sleep. After the incident, my boss installed a chain and hook to keep the door open. Then he held a staff meeting, urging us to take precautions, like informing others before heading downstairs. Despite the efforts to reassure us, I refused to ever step foot in that icy tomb again. The thing that stuck out after I gathered my thoughts regarding the whole ordeal was the fact the keg I'd placed to hold the door open was at the other side of the room after I got out. It was a full steel keg, not something that just slides away by accident, let alone quietly. As time went on working there, I began to get curious about the place. I'd heard the legends and rumors among employees, but I decided to dig into the history of the building, see what I could find. I found some old newspaper articles, tales from locals, some anecdotes from regular customers. Apparently, the brewery during the Prohibition era was actually a slaughterhouse, serving as a speakeasy and a hotspot for criminal activity. Allegedly, some folks had met their ends here. With this new info, I tried my best to respect what spirits might be here, and to keep my eyes and ears open at all times. One particularly memorable encounter occurred during a patrol of the loading docks. As I made my rounds one night, a chill crept up my spine. It was like someone was watching my every move, and when I got close to the source, it laid an invisible icy hand on my back. The moment I felt that, after all I'd been through so far, I walked right away and stayed away from that area. I'd learned my lesson. Not long after, I quit working there. It just wasn't worth it anymore.
Cities where people are bustling, life is busy, and there are always things to do. I live in a major city on the eastern seaboard. For my privacy, I'll keep the name secret. You can call me Willow. I work a rather odd job most people would be disgusted by. I work in city sanitation. We clean the streets, help replace pipes, and sub for the garbage guys when they're off for the day and no one else will fill in for them. It's a dirty job, sometimes downright awful, but it helps the city keep clean and not be overrun by filth. I have many bizarre stories from that job. Body parts from a local hospital after surgeries, dead animals, mysterious goo. The stories never seem to end with what people want to get rid of. With this particular day, I was working closely with sewage maintenance crews. There had been a blockage deep under the main street through the city, and we couldn't tell what the issue was. It was far too deep for our devices to reach. So here I was, dressed head to toe in protective gear. I was used to this. My thin frame tended to let me maneuver through the pipes without much of a problem. A few years back, I was absolutely disgusted by this. But nowadays, it's just another day. I checked all my gear before descending down a manhole a quarter mile from where the blockage was estimated to be. It was an old passage, mostly brick and cement, nothing like the pipes I was so used to. A carving in a brick told me that the tunnel was built in 1965. It was well worn and I was rather tender-footed, wandering through the sewage. If it wasn't for the peppermint oil that I rubbed into the suit, it would have been much more foul, enough to make the eyes water and even the most seasoned person gag. I made my way to the blockage, staring carefully ahead, making sure to duck under utility pipes and the occasional landmine of human waste. It was constantly flowing, but sometimes they would get stuck between the bricks that were guiding my way. I'd finally seen what exactly had been blocking the passage after a few twists and turns down the never-ending tunnels. It was a rather large mass, piled up halfway up the passage. It reeked, even through my peppermint. I forced down the instinctive urge to gag and went to work with my tools trying to pull, cut, and rip the blockage down. I saw things like twigs from the surface that people probably stuffed down storm drains. I saw a few bugs scattering about, and that was enough to send chills along my skin. I kept at it, eventually getting it down to a fourth of the way, when I paused, horrifying at seeing something move. I backed away slowly, absolutely terrified of what it could be. There were noises from the pile that sounded human but deeper. I don't know if it was something feral in my mind, but I fought the urge to run, thinking that somehow it was an animal that managed to get itself tossed down a manhole cover, or something else that needed help. I poked the pile with the end of a wrench, and then it shifted, revealing a creature coated in trash, waste, and something old and red. I couldn't make any sense of what I was seeing, but the smell was horrible. It only grew worse as the creature stood and stared at me with deep silvery eyes. They reflected greenish yellow in the light from my head torch. I did not know how to react, so for a while I was just stunned in that spot. The creature shook itself, staring me down before seeming to grin, and it took a step towards me. That got my body to move. I began to bolt down the passage, praying that I was taking the right turns. I'd left most of my gear behind, and I was running faster than I should have been, slipping and sliding in the disgusting sludge as that creature pounded behind me. I was screaming by then. Horrific noises came from the beast as it began to catch up with me. I was racing through the endless twists and turns before realizing nothing looked familiar. There was no graffiti, no etchings from the fellow workers. The brick walls seemed to enclose around me then as I panicked more and more. I hooked to right, hoping there would be another turn to send me back down the right path. That thing was right behind me then, taking swipes at my suit. I could feel it. I couldn't understand how or why it was like this, but I was scared. My legs burned and my eyes clouded with tears. My breath came in short, gasping sounds as I ran, trying not to break down sobbing in terror. I was dashing down the corridor, no turns visible to my dismay, but I kept going, the burning in my legs starting to actually hurt. My muscles were cramping up, most of them even shaking, but I kept going until I felt searing pain on my shoulder. That thing had taken a swipe at me, leaving gashes. I howled in pain and scrambled, trying my hardest to maintain the speed I'd been going. Thank God I found my way to the ladder, the one I'd been searching for, and I screamed as I practically ran up the thing to the manhole, leaving the creature behind in that sewer. But at some point, based off the noise, it seemed to have stopped following me. But why? And when? I desperately relayed what had happened to my team, and even showed them the gash that extended from my shoulder halfway down my back. My team was skeptical, saying it was a hallucination from the fumes, and that I could have gotten the suit torn from brushing against the brick. Maybe there was old rebar down there that had caught on to me and got me. I was quickly sent to the hospital for treatment. I get a whole bunch of staples, and my statement was taken by my supervisor. He didn't believe me either, but he gave me a small, deceitful smile of understanding. I had the next week off to recover and gather myself. I'll leave you with this. I know what I saw. Stay out of the sewers.